it away, Hamish.
Hi. Yeah, so my presentation is just about implementing the tools of PBS within a forward-thinking organisation with a strong aversion to jargon. And I guess that's a bit of a mouthful, but all I really wanted to talk about is the organisation I work for, how they've worked for the last 20 years. They're run by an incredible lady called Doreen Kelly. Why they're averse to PBS whilst fundamentally supporting its values. So the perturbing thing for me all along, I guess, has been that both PBS and Beyond Limits, in my experience, want quality outcomes for people, and semantics shouldn't really get in the way of that. So Beyond Limits shouldn't be made to use it because of its name or because of the language it uses, but in the same way, they shouldn't be put off by the language either. And all that really matters is the quality of outcome that we're getting for people. Yeah, can I have the next slide, please, Hannah? So this is just an introduction, a little bit about my journey through PBS. I started working with this guy at the top of that wall. That's about 40 foot up. That guy's blind. He's a bit of a hero of mine, actually. And I started working with him in 2014. So his care coordinator, who was a guy called John Anderson, who's an absolute legend, described him as a passive recipient of care. So Ricky's life had very little in the way of adventure, and he was kind of described by a list of things he couldn't do. So he didn't like noise, he didn't like busy environments, he didn't like walking on sand, and there was probably a million other things. He was highly medicated, so he took a lot of anti-anxiety and antidepressant medication. And he was having periods of self-harm for about 3 hours per day. We were introduced to a guy called John Anderson and a lady called Leanne Eastman, who were both absolutely amazing. I actually went to the Jargon talk earlier, and they were talking about how language can be, I guess, problematic or clinical language, and it's something that Doreen is wary of. But my experience of John is his language is the most academic. He's the brightest, most intelligent man. He used language that I couldn't understand. I had to get him to dumb it down. Sometimes I had to get him to dumb it down and go to Leanne, who was his boss at the time, and quite often she didn't understand. But he was the most caring man I've ever met. So I'm not sure language is always so much of a problem as we think. So they were kind of involved in that point, but kept at arm's length. And to give you an idea of the overpowering stories about this guy, I took him for swimming for 2 years, and we used to put a life jacket on. And then one day we went up to the swimming pool, it was empty. So I said to the guys, "I'd like to take a photo for his family." He sent it to his nan, who said, "He can swim, why is he wearing a life jacket?" Turned up the next week, took it off, and he could swim absolutely fine. So somewhere in his life, somebody determined that the safest thing is for him to wear a life jacket, and it's just absolutely not necessary. So it's really important that we don't believe the hype about people. Can you imagine how frustrating it must be to be able to swim and not having the ability to tell people that you don't need a jacket? It just must be absolutely awful. So we moved to Beyond Limits in 2015 with Ricky. All of a sudden we were able to take positive risks. We were able to provide Ricky with more opportunities. We didn't really have a PBS plan, but John and Leanne had helped us introduce a few things. So we had active support. We had an idea that activity should be developmental, and there should be some kind of process for helping this guy to not just be in Groundhog Day every day. They also helped us with behavioural analysis and data collection, and we started doing a lot of that. So to put the kind of analysis into perspective, periods of self-harm are down to about half an hour per month now. So that's from 3 hours a day. It's over 6 years, but it was kind of a change in attitude stemmed the biggest reduction, then sort of change in medication. But the behavioural analysis has really enabled us to focus in on the little things and work out where we can be doing better. And both diazepam and risperidone have been reduced to 0 in that time. So then we started taking on other teams to replicate the positive outcomes. And we found that a common denominator across all the services that were struggling has been a belief that the person they're supporting is complex and kind of almost like a loss of humanity for the person. The starting point for change has always been a change in how the person is perceived by their support team and trying to put the humanity back in the room. So the person's not aggressive or testing new staff, but often anxious or have anxieties due to previous mistreatment in the system. So far, we've always managed to support people to a better, less restrictive place through the use of the tools of PBS and the freedoms offered to us by Beyond Limits, and the rejection of moral panics, and a really strong treat the person as a person, but a person that's been abused within the system quite often. And one of the things that was kind of a recurring theme as we were working with teams that weren't working is, so we'd be working with them for a few months and we'd be saying to the guys that had been there previously, you know, you're having more incidents than some of the newer guys. Why do you think that is? And the response almost always seemed to be to come back that, well, those guys are giving him what he wants. And we were kind of, well, that's the point. So we're here to support this guy to do what he wants. And somewhere in the world it had been lost. And these weren't bad people. These support workers weren't bad people. They'd just kind of been lost in a system where giving somebody what they want had become this kind of terrible thing that we shouldn't do. So then I took on a role as PBS lead about 18 months ago. And so while we'd been kind of using the advice given to us by John and Leanne, we hadn't really recognised the tools we were using as PBS, or probably really understood what PBS was. Although Leanne's job title probably should have given us a clue. I think she was PBS coordinator for Devon or something. And in 2020, we went through the training program with PBS UK, and the courses really helped us link together all the bits of work we were doing and the things we were doing quite well, but also highlighting stuff that we could probably do better. And I know for my organisation, the teams that I work with, we've been quite heavily led by data because of John's influence. And I know that the organisation during that period had been looking at it and sort of, how does that work? Why does it work? Is it something that we should use? But being able to talk to the guys at PBS UK, I know that we're looking at taking on Rhymes quite soon, I think, which will just be so life enhancing for people when spend less time collecting the data and trying to analyze the data ourselves, when we can have a tool that can just kind of do it for us. It's going to be immense. And you know, it's a big thank you to Doreen for moving in a direction that she can see works, but isn't necessarily a way that she's naturally affiliated to. And I wanted to talk a bit about, so I've been here for 5 or 6 years, and I'm quite a divisive character. So I think at times Beyond Limits have found it quite hard to work with me because I see things in a certain way, and I have quite high expectations of what the organisation should give us in terms of freedoms and autonomy and being able to move people's lives forward without being handicapped by some of the red tape. And I know that we've got it really good here in that we're allowed some freedoms. And kind of in my defence, I'd say that support work is divisive. So I absolutely believe in PBS, as I believe in Beyond Limits, but I believe both of these things can be just besmirched by labels of people being complex or moral panics in place to excuse the shortcomings of support workers out of their depths. And I really don't think that people's lives should be restricted because someone being paid to support the member is out of their depth. I'm not trying to blame individual support workers, more systems that allow it to happen. So we quite often arrive into a service where we're being told it isn't working because the person's complex, or the behaviours are happening because the person's complex. And quite often it's, well, so far every time in my experience, and we've been through it 5 or 6 times, 5 or 6 people, is the person isn't complex. Somehow the support they're being provided has just been funneled into a way that doesn't work for them. And quite often it's because it's led by the support worker that finds their behaviour the most challenging. And rather than finding that person somewhere to work that that would better suit their abilities, we end up placing restrictions on people because the support workers can't manage things effectively. And it's how do you get around that, I guess. Sorry, can I have the next slide, Hannah? So here's Ricky. So we were told Ricky didn't like noise or busy environments. He started going to Argyle, goes regularly. He loves it particularly when they're losing and everybody in the crowd is getting quite animated and upset. And in some ways, I think he much prefers it if they lose than if they win. So it's just another reminder to just don't believe the hype about people. Ricky, on his worst day, so if he's got setting factors, he would not enjoy a busy environment or loud environment, but on a good day, he absolutely loves it. Oh, sorry, can I have the next one, Hannah? So this is just a little bit about the company that I work for. So Doreen Kelly started Partners for Inclusion in 2000. And I think she was asked to come down by the NHS or somebody after the Winterbourne scandal. I'm pretty sure. And she started Beyond Limits in 2011. So for those people that don't know Doreen, she's an absolute legend or completely terrifying, depending on which side, whether you're on a good side at that time or not. And that's usually dependent on if you're getting good quality of life for the person you're supporting. And she would probably go mad at me for saying good quality of life. She'd want to call it having fun, or her aversion to jargon's really, really strong. And I think quite a lot of the time she'd like to have normal language for normal lives, which I really agree with. But having worked with John, who has some of the most amazing language, a lot of it I can't understand, I know that we wouldn't be in this position without him. So language isn't everything, I guess. So Beyond Limits support 20 people. They all have an individual service fund, which offers the person needed flexibility. So the photo there is Ricky, his family and his support staff. They all went away for a week to Sweden. The support staff were mostly self-funding. Nobody was getting paid. Ricky did a 50-kilometer trek through the Swedish forest, something that when I met him initially, having heard the kind of narratives about him and all the hype, it's not something I would have expected him to be able to do. So it's really important to just be aware of the limitations that we put on people. So Beyond Limits support people with big reputations, quite often out of long stay hospitals. Quite a few of those people came from Winterbourne. I just can't imagine how it must have been living in this place. If anybody's read Alexis Quinn's heartbreaking account of living within the system, and then try and imagine the horrific effects of the abuse of this place on top of that, we should find it a lot easier to keep humanity in the room, particularly for those support staff that are working directly with people. I know that the lady that I've just taken on now, has given me a slap a few times, and it's a lot easier to not take it personally when you can kind of imagine where she's coming through. So my tipping point might end up with me just swearing or feeling a little bit agitated, but I haven't had the past experiences or had the restrictions of living in services. So to me, to lash out is almost a little bit more normal. So it's a brilliant system that allows for positive risk taking. Quite Beyond Limits influence had an immediate impact on Ricky, just by being given the opportunity to let him live. Incidents reduced immediately on the support provider. We think the initial reduction was just due to being able to take positive risks. We then made further reductions through medication reduction and behavioural analysis. and Beyond Limits at that time had working policies, which, or they still do, but it mostly fits in with very well with PBS. It has what John would call primary preventative strategies, including skill building and quality of life, which, you know, in my mind is mostly just having fun. However, in most of the cases, the working policies aren't data-led. However, Doreen's open to this. She's not open to it because of the kind of rhetoric that goes around, but she's seen it work internally, which I think really, really helped her move on. And Beyond Limits has been really brave in setting up an organisation which has encouraged people to live life over the kind of perceived safety of restrictive practices, I guess. Yeah, could I have the next slides, please?
Just got a few more minutes left, Hamish, just to give you a little prompt.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, so again, Ricky didn't like big crowds and noise, and he went to a festival, saw the Killers were 40,000 people. Can I have the next one? So Doreen's concerns with positive support I'll just skip one of them, but her main concern was the language. So she picked up this quote, which is PBS is a framework which involves primary use of constructional principles, procedures, and behaviour analysis to assess support behaviour change, but includes secondary use of other complementary evidence-based approaches to support behaviour change at multiple levels. Can I have the next one, Hannah? So her kind of, when I was sort of asking her for her take on it, I'm quite a keen advocate for PBS, but she was saying that she found the language to be clinical highbrow and would not be language that could be used to help people supported and families with the issues they're experiencing. It's not geared up to be human, person-centered, and it's exclusive language, exclusive to professionals only. And if we're really going to support people and families, well, then language and approaches need to be inclusive. And I think she's got a point. I often need an interpreter to decipher this stuff, and it's quite often John, and I have to get him to dumb it down for me a few times. But I'm a really keen advocate of PBS because I've seen it work on numerous occasions, and would argue it can be both human and person-centered. But it depends very much on the people delivering it, and much in the same way the opportunities given to the teams supporting at Beyond Limits require the people to deliver in a human, person-centered way. So I think with all the systems, it's just about getting the right people in. And I understand where Doreen's coming from in terms of language being a barrier for the people we support. But the big successes we've had have been through Leanne Eastman and John. And anybody who knows John, his use of academic language is absolutely beautiful. And I don't understand it half the time, but he'll persevere with me until I do. Have we got time for the last one or not so much?
It depends on how important it is. We've got a couple of questions come in, and I think sort of
it's up to you, Hannah. So the next one was just like how that's another one. So yeah. First time I met Ricky, we couldn't get him on a trike. It took us about 20 weeks of trying to get him on. He was very, very anxious. I don't know if you can see there, he's actually smiling. He absolutely loves it. So just because somebody's anxious about something doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And for Rick, I'm not risk averse in it. I'm not scared of taking risks, but I could never have imagined him going on a bike. During one of the lockdowns, we were supposed to be doing a 200-kilometer cycle around a Finnish archipelago. We were obviously just waiting to get back onto that. Yeah, that's that. How the tools have been implemented. So it's been really slow and incremental. So we started using a lot of the tools back in 2015. A lot of them were working. As we've taken on more teams, I think Doreen's aversion to letting us use some of the tools of PBS have reduced. But it started in 2015 with John and Leanne from Westbourne. They introduced the team to active support, and they were really super patient with us while we were getting things wrong. And I'm guessing that their perseverance, because they could see we were trying. We weren't always understanding what they wanted us to do, but we were always trying to do what we were instructed to do. And then over the next few years, we used those tools from John and Leanne to work with other people and tried to get the most out of our luck, really, to be at an organisation that lets us support people in a kind of free way to give them opportunities to live. And then last year we were given the opportunity to have training with PBS UK. We attended all 3 courses, the system-wide Practicing PBS and Train the Trainer. All 3 were excellent and run by some incredible people. And I think the opening line in the system-wide course was, I don't care what you call it, we just want to help you get quality outcomes for people, which perked my interest. And it really helps when you can go back to your organisation if they're worried about the kind of jargon of PBS. And you can go back and say, well, you know, we're speaking to these guys and this is what they're saying. So the tools we've been given are incredible, but really do require a forward-thinking organisation and the personnel just to keep the humanity in the room.